Speaks to how the government is great on announcing but fails on delivery.
The honourable member for Vancouver Granville.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to reply to the speech from the throne, and I'll be sharing my time with the member for Nanaimo, LadySmith. Today I speak in support of the throne's speech, but not without reservations. Speaking frankly, my initial instinct and intention was to vote against the throne's speech, given the ethical challenges of this government. However, I cannot vote against it. This is because I've not heard from one constituent in my riding that says they want an election during a pandemic. Not one, and regardless of political affiliation. Despite growing dissatisfaction with this government's approach to governance and its respect for our institutions, there is a level of support at the current time for continuity and nonpartisan governments as we work together and take all necessary steps to confront the pandemic and its impact on our way of life. Fighting COVID-19 must be nonpartisan. I have to say that there has been some higher degrees of cooperation and general agreement on programs that have been created to support the fight and, importantly, to support Canadians. We all know at the appropriate and responsible time there will be an election. For now, let us lead as an effective and impactful minority parliament. An election will happen, I presume, sometime after the second wave of COVID, and hopefully then only after a vaccine has been widely administered. But for now, Canadians want us all, and I mean us all, to remain focused on the job at hand, of public health and the immediate economic needs, and to do so without mindless partisanship and unnecessary conflict. We all need to remain vigilant. Governments can only do so much. Individually, we need to be responsible, and we must continue to follow all public health advice. There is little room for error. As are all of you, I am guided by the people in my riding. Our constituency office has sought and received feedback on issues that are most important to people during the pandemic. Let me tell you a bit about what they have shared. The top issue is, not surprisingly, dealing with the immediate impact of COVID. Second, and related, are issues around finance and the economy, followed by the environment and housing. One message from my constituents, and in reply to the first part of the speech from the throne, is about addressing the immediate needs ahead of us. We must all ensure that the programs that we have put in place and with such haste are in fact working, that the law and policy was right, and where these programs continue, that they are sustainable. This is not a question about austerity, it is a matter of good governance. And Madam Speaker, we need new metrics. If we are not just using debt to GDP, we need other fiscal anchors. Some specific issues raised by my constituents include a meaningful discussion and move towards a universal basic income, as well as investing in seniors, childcare, and pharmacare. As to the balance of the speech from the throne, well, it was a shopping list, if you like, of progressive policies, and many long repeated and long outstanding promises. In the past, I was part of a government with many of these same shopping list items. Often, as Canadians unfortunately have become used to, actions do not match the words, where ultimately political expediency got in the way of progress. Importantly, there are in fact many people and groups talking about what our post-pandemic recovery should or shouldn't look like. There is talk of a green recovery or a just recovery. These are important conversations we all must listen to. I will say, for any meaningful recovery to work, especially if it is to be transformative in addressing the broader challenges of our time, we need Parliament and all our institutions of government to be more effective, to work better, something the speech from the throne does not address. As we have worked together in the face of common threat of COVID-19, We have adapted. Parliament has adapted. As we move forward, and if we truly want to build back better, as the throne speech opines, then we need to think about the tools we have to construct and build the nation we want and how our government works. If we can work together and change the way this place operates on the fly because of COVID-19, then surely, Madam Speaker, we can make the deeper changes that are needed to make this place more effective and more accountable all of the time, and where members of Parliament's voices matter. We also know in dealing with the pandemic that there are still deep-seated issues with the provinces around the division of powers, including, as has long been the case, around health supports. In our young country, we have an evolving system of cooperative federalism. There is a role for the government and a role for the provinces and territories. And if we truly want to build back better when the immediate threat is over, we must ensure that we have the right foundations to build on, one that includes Indigenous nations and governments recognized and constituted as Indigenous peoples determine. We should, at the very least, be open to a conversation about governance reform, including constitutional reform, the Senate, Quebec, Indigenous peoples, the environment, and making the Federation better. Further, in addition to parliamentary reform, there is a need for electoral reform. There is also much work to do to address true reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And simply adopting UNDRIP and making some program enhancements, while important steps, are not enough. With strong governance, we will be better equipped to tackle the big issues of our day, issues that will still be with us after COVID-19, such as climate change, or the breakdown of the international rules-based order, or wealth inequality. So, Madam Speaker, as we come out of this pandemic, maybe we should start with our institutions and make building them better a priority. Yes, this will be tough, but Canadians have always been strong and resilient and able to show governments the way forward. Collectively, we are only as strong and resilient as our institutions that support us, beyond party and beyond politics. I was raised to always seek balance, where everyone in a community has a role to play. Rooted in these teachings is the importance of our interconnectedness, our responsibility to one another and to our environment. Madam Speaker, our collective ways of being, indeed our humanity, is being tested as we respond to COVID-19. We are in a learning moment. There is a reason why some groups are being hit harder than others during the pandemic: the vulnerable, the marginalized. These disproportionate impacts are in part a reflection of enduring injustices, the legacy of colonialism and systemic racism that manifest themselves throughout society and our institutions. More and more, I've been thinking about what it would be like if we had a society in which we truly recognized and supported one another and our fundamental unity in our diversity. This is not a new idea. If we are able to recognize it and do something about it during a pandemic, then why not permanently? If we can see and act on it now, then if we don't, when will we? Moving forward, we need more than a shopping list of policy ideas. We need a vision, and we need to establish clear priorities. We need political will, and we need resolute action. We also need a better way to measure social well-being, our collective health. Today, we typically use GDP to make assumptions about social well-being, our standards of living. The assumption being that the higher the per capita amount, the better the standards are. However, as an economic tool, GDP only makes assumptions about the basic standards of living, which can be different across the socioeconomic spectrum of a nation. COVID has highlighted how standards of living are different across communities. Moreover, our welfare is affected by other factors: mental well-being, cultural resilience, and very importantly, environmental health, things GDP does not consider. What we need, Madam Speaker, are better and more inclusive socioeconomic factors, indicators that help us develop budgets that aim to increase the social well-being of Canadians and not just the economic bottom line. Planning based on what we truly value, where all human potential is maximized, is how our society will be truly transformed. This is the core of my teachings, the teachings of my people, the Kwakwaka'wakw, who have survived for millennia. This is the road to recovery. This is building back better. Gaila Kasla. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, there has been a great deal of cooperation. And when we talk about individual members of Parliament, I think that we'll see that over the last 8 months, there's been a great deal of feedback from all sides of the House as we try to guide us through national leadership on the file. But it's also important that we work with the different other jurisdictions, whether it's provincial, Indigenous leaders, and so many of the other stakeholders, non-profit organizations, and we all collectively have a responsible role to play in this. And I'm wondering if my colleague could provide her thoughts in terms of just how important it is that those other organizations, in particular the non-profits and others, also get on board in supporting and continue to support the fight against COVID-19.
Member for Vancouver Granville.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for the important comments and the question. I think it was implicit, it was implicit in my speech or my reply, the importance and the necessity of recognizing the interconnectedness between and among all of us. Of course, this includes all members of Parliament in this place. And importantly, in that regard, I believe it's fundamental for members of Parliament to be able to effectively represent their constituents, which includes not-for-profit organizations, which includes faith-based organizations, be able to ensure that they develop relationships with municipalities, with provincial representatives, in order to feed back or to provide those comments back to Parliament to make the decisions more well-rounded, more effective, and more representative of the incredible diversity in this country. So I hope that we continue in this minority Parliament to work collaboratively.
Comments? L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Avignon, Mathis Matapédia Matan. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for her speech, and I agree with her that the fight against COVID-19 must be done without partisanship, but I wonder how she can trust a government that is unable to keep its promises when it comes to understanding, awareness, and reconciliation. If we go back to the throne speech, promise to accelerate to the work with regard to the National Action Plan to respond to the National Inquiry on murdered and missing Indigenous women, and to put into effect the calls for action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It'll now be a year and a half since that report was tabled. It was another I think that the families and the loved ones have waited far too long. I haven't been able to get responses from the Minister responsible for Indigenous Affairs at committee this summer. I think they've waited too long for reconciliation. Thank you.
Vancouver Granville.
Well, I thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague across the way for the important question. I 100% agree that Indigenous peoples, the families of the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, residential school survivors have waited too long for concrete action from this government. And she opened her question up with, having a level of trust. Trust is incredibly important, and it's incredibly hard to rebuild. I certainly, probably more than anyone in this place, can say that the level of trust I have for actually fulfilling promises has significantly wavered. This is an important issue. It's one that can't be addressed simply by pretty words or tears. We have to take concrete action. We can't delay action plans. We know what needs to be done when it comes to Indigenous peoples, and we have to act now. And I look forward to working with all members in this place, and would be happy to have further conversations with the member opposite. Thank you.
The commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
Thank you, Madam And good to see a fellow colleague from British Columbia deliver virtually a very thoughtful speech. And she's one of the first former Liberal who has actually sort of acknowledged the importance of a fiscal anchor. And I wonder if she could talk a little bit more about her thinking around that fiscal anchor. We know that we're giving critical support right now, but I think it is frightening in terms of what ultimately will be our fiscal challenges and situation. Thank you.
Member for Vancouver Granville, very quickly.
Thank you to the member from our home province of British Columbia. And I think that we need to continue to be very open, very transparent. I look forward to seeing the budget when it comes. Hopefully it comes and speaks to the necessary need for fiscal anchors. We certainly don't have the debt to GDP declining fiscal anchor. So we need to be open and transparent, have conversations about it. And, I believe fundamentally in fiscal responsibility. I also believe in sustainability and support for Canadians, but to have conversations across this House on fiscal accountability.
Reprise du débat, the honourable member for Nanaimo, LadySmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to stand here today on the territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people to represent constituents in Nanaimo, LadySmith, and Greens across Canada. There are a number of things in the speech from the throne that I'm pleased to hear. In fact, there are some sections that sound a lot like the Green Party platform I ran on in 2015 and 2019. There are also sections that echo the Green Party's roadmap to economic recovery from the pandemic, reimagining our future. What the throne speech is missing is plans for bold actions in those documents. To quote our new Green Party leader, Annamie Paul, platitudes are not a plan. We are facing two unprecedented crises, a global pandemic and a climate emergency. Both of these crises require that we listen to the scientists and the experts. Both of these crises require bold actions. This speech from the throne does not reflect the urgency of this moment. We keep hearing that we're all in this together, but this pandemic has laid bare the inequality in Canada. Those who have been affected by the pandemic are seniors, women, people of color, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and low-wage workers. At the same time, the wealthiest Canadians have been making money hand over fist. The 20 richest people in Canada have increased their wealth by $37 billion during the 6 months of this pandemic. It's time for a wealth tax in this country. It's time for the wealthy to pay for their fair share for the public services their businesses and employees rely on. It's time that the internet giants and multinational corporations that do business in Canada pay their fair share of taxes as well. Small and medium-sized Canadian enterprises are suffering from the economic fallout of the pandemic. In particular, the travel, tourism, hospitality, and entertainment sectors need additional help so these businesses can survive. The nonprofit sector provides vital services to Canadians, especially right now. This sector needs additional targeted support as well. Small and medium-sized businesses are the engine of the Canadian economy and employ almost 90% of the private sector workers in this country. These businesses need support to get through the second wave of this pandemic. Madam Speaker, we need to do a better job taking care of each other. We are the only country in the world with universal health care, but no universal pharmacare. It's mentioned in the throne speech, but we've heard it before, and we haven't seen a plan. Universal pharmacare will save billions in unnecessary healthcare costs by ensuring people have the medicine they need. We need a universal dental program to complete our universal healthcare system. This too will save billions in unnecessary healthcare costs. A $90 filling today can save $10,000 in a heart operation down the road. Our recovery must focus on supporting women and families. Canada urgently needs a universal childcare program to enable more women to return to the workplace. Thousands of people across this country are homeless or at risk of homelessness. It's more important than ever that the federal government invest in affordable housing, in particular community-owned cooperative housing. The announcements on housing programs sound good, but the funding needs to flow right away. We have an opioid crisis in this country. Thousands of people have died from drug poisoning. Addiction is a health and social issue. Our public health officers are telling us to follow evidence-based solutions to this crisis. We need to listen. We need a national mental health strategy. The Green Party has long been calling for a national strategy for seniors, including national standards for long-term care and additional supports for home care so people can age in place. Seniors deserve a top-up of OAS and GIS to help make ends meet. Many people with disabilities have been waiting for long periods of time for the benefits and protections that they need. The COVID-19 one-time support payment for people with disabilities was announced 3 months into the pandemic, and it's now almost 4 months later and nobody has received a check. I understand those checks are supposed to be sent at the end of this month. People with disabilities are sick of waiting and sick of being left behind. Veterans Affairs Canada had a backlog of almost 50,000 disability benefit applications as of March 2020. It will take 3 years to clear that backlog with the current resource levels. Veterans deserve better. Young people and students are not mentioned in the speech from the throne. The Green Party has been advocating for the elimination of tuition fees so we can create an educated workforce without burdening our young people with unsustainable debt. Northern European countries all have free tuition. It's a matter of priorities. Let's prioritize our young people. The Canada Student Service Grant was a very bad idea from the beginning, and we know how that turned out. Those funds should have gone into the Canada Summer Jobs Program to help youth and nonprofits get through the pandemic. Canada Summer Jobs was underfunded. In my riding of Nanaimo LadySmith alone, there was $500,000 worth of unfunded applications. We need to bring our social programs in line with the Northern European countries where citizens have a real social safety net from cradle to grave. The biggest opportunity that this government has missed in the speech from the throne is a guaranteed livable income. Our current patchwork of social programs allow too many people to fall through the cracks. A guaranteed livable income would create an income floor under which no Canadian would fall. It would eliminate extreme poverty in this country. I can hear the objections now. How are you going to pay for all of this? Let's go back to where I began. Canada needs a wealth tax. We need to close tax loopholes that allow people and corporations to avoid taxes in Canada and offshore their wealth. It's worth emphasizing that the costs of social inequality are far greater than the costs of taking care of people to start with. Let's use this resource wealth we have to create maximum employment and benefits for Canadians, starting with First Nations and Indigenous people, who are the rightful owner of those resources. We need to implement all of the recommendations on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, and it's time to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We also need electoral reform. Not mentioned in the speech from the throne, no surprise. There are good things in the speech, and there are a lot of things missing, or things that need to be improved on. But the bottom line is that there is no real plan to do our part to stop our own destructive practices that are wiping out the biodiversity on this planet, destroying our climate, and threatening the future of our children and grandchildren. We still have the climate targets set by Stephen Harper's Conservative government. Pathetic and inadequate targets. And there is no plan to even reach those pathetic and inadequate targets. Since the first climate conference in Geneva in 1979, successive Canadian governments have been well aware of climate change. Only one government actually bothered to establish a plan to meet the targets that they agreed to. That was the Paul Martin government, which was brought down by the Conservatives and the NDP before those plans could be implemented. Britain has set a carbon budget in law. They set plans and hold to those carbon budget targets independent of the toxic partisan politics that dominate our electoral system. The UK has reduced their emissions by 42% below 1990 levels, while Canada has increased emissions by 21% since 1990. Canada is a climate do-nothing. I will not vote for a speech from the throne that does not include the targets that science demands and a real plan of action to meet those targets and address the crisis we are facing. My work here is not to ensure that I get re-elected. My work here is not to boost the fortunes of the Green Party. My work here is not to play a game of partisan politics. My work and role here is to push this government as hard as I can to do the right thing, to improve the lives of Canadians and take real action on climate change. We owe our children and grandchildren nothing less than the full defense of their future on this planet. There are other members of other parties who know this to be true. I want them to know that their work here is to fight for the existence of humanity. Their party bosses and big donors may be interested in making the last chunk of money from fracking, but they need to question what their purpose is on this planet, at this time, in this place. Think about those moments in your childhood when you saw a world full of wonder and possibility. We in this House have the power to make decisions that count, decisions that matter. This is our time to meet the challenge of our time. This speech from the throne does not meet the challenge. It's time to do better. I'll be voting no.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his passionate speech. He mentioned that universal pharmacare, which is an important plank in the throne speech, that he hasn't seen a plan. I was wondering if he could comment on the Hoskin report that the government commissioned in terms of universal pharmacare and the government's movement to create a Canadian drug agency, to create a formulary, and a commitment for federal funding on rare drugs. Does he support that? Is that a plan? And does he disagree with the Hoskins report?
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, LadySmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree with the Hoskins report, which also calls for a universal, single-payer pharmacare system. And we need to get that implemented. There are people in this country who are dealing with very expensive drugs, with rare diseases that need help. And there are seniors, there are families with high cost of drugs, and when people can't afford the drugs that they need to take, they end up in the emergency room, and they're costing our healthcare system a lot more. So let's get that Hoskins report recommendation done.
Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So a lot in that. The member wants to harness the wealth of the resource sector, yet the Green Party wants to shut down Canada's hydrocarbons. The minister wants to go after offshore savings, but of course Canadians put money offshore when taxes at home are too high. So his solution is higher taxes. But let me give the member some numbers from Dr. Mark Milkey. If you earn up to $50,000, you're in 68% of the tax filers in this country, and you pay 21% of all personal income tax revenues. If you earn 50 to 100, that's 23% of tax filers, you pay 35% of all tax revenues. 100,000 to 150, that's 5.8% of filers, accounts for 18% of tax revenue. 150 to 200,000, we're down to 2.1% of filers. The members in this tax bracket, and he and other taxpayers account for 13% of all tax revenues. And finally, those that earn above $200,000 a year account for the 1%. They pay 21% of all tax revenue. So who is the member talking about taxing? Is it all taxpayers? Is it those who earn $1 million? There aren't many of those. Is it those like himself that earn 100,000? Who is he talking about taxing? You bring in these
Honourable Member for Nanaimo, LadySmith.
I am talking about the 20 billionaires who made $37 billion during the 6 months of the most economic, catastrophic problem in the history of this country. So those businesses, Jimmy Patterson, what does he need $8 billion for? What do these people need to hoard all this wealth for when in this country their workers are working for minimum wage? Why? So, you know,
Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. L'Honourable député de
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. I want to thank my colleague from Nanaimo, LadySmith, for his brilliant speech. And I agree with a number of points. I have a specific question. He often has raised issues that fall under Quebec and provincial jurisdiction. One of the things that interests me most is federal transfers for health. Our needs, according to the Constitution, would be around $91 million. I would like my colleague to speak to the importance of jurisdiction as well as fair health transfers.
Nanaimo, LadySmith.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I believe that we do need to get health transfers to the provinces to make sure that the citizens of this country are taken care of properly. And we need to expand our health services with mental health services that are included in the Canada Health Act, with universal pharmacare, with universal dental care. We need to take care of Canadians properly. It's the responsibility of the provinces to do that, and we need to transfer the money to them to make sure that that happens.